we know at this hour?
Well, as you just said, Poppy and Jim, details are still coming in. The reports are very initial. Here at the Pentagon, they are, in fact, trying to put together the exact details of what did happen in Manbij. This is a city in northern Syria where there have been a dozen joint patrols by U.S. and Turkish forces. The U.S. military spokesman put a tweet out a short time ago that could be foretelling. The spokesman says that they are aware of open source reports regarding an explosion in Syria. Coalition forces conducted a routine patrol in Syria today. We are still gathering information and will share additional details at a later time. These routine patrols in Manbij in northern Syria have been going on for some time, but this is right now a very unsettled situation along this border region. The U.S., President Trump, has said that U.S. troops will be coming out of Syria, and just this week he talked about a 20-mile safe zone across the border because the Turks to the north want the Kurdish forces that the U.S. backs and other Kurdish forces to be pushed back away from their border. They worry that all of this is terrorist activity by Kurdish forces. The U.S. does not agree with that, but is talking about that Turkish demand for a pushback from the border. And at the same time, the Russians are saying this is an area of Syria where the regime of Bashar al-Assad will take over. So this right now is a very unsettled situation in the area. And by all accounts, there has been some type of bombing attack there. More details expected in the coming hours.
Well, Barbara, just for our viewers' sake, when the military says open source, they mean what's out in the public realm. There have been a lot of tweets about this. I believe a video has surfaced, what purports to be this attack. I think we could show that to our viewers here.
Colleague and senior international correspondent Nick Payton-Walsh. And Nick, I mean, you have important perspective on this, given that you were there less than a year ago reporting in this region.
Yeah, I mean, it shows you quite how more vulnerable potentially U.S. troops could be there, although we don't have the details at this point. But as Barbara said, that tweet was perhaps telling of maybe bad news in the hours ahead. Back in February, I walked round the main market of Manbij with the U.S. commander of Special Forces at the time. We were not wearing body armor or helmets. It was a relaxed atmosphere, but there was clear tension nearby. The reason why Manbij is so important is that the Syrian Kurds, who've been fighting ISIS with America, obviously a global fight there, were pretty much facing off against Turkish-backed Syrian rebels, often a matter of 100 yards or so away from each other, occasionally pot shots fired at each other. And the Americans were kind of there to calm things down because nobody felt Turkey would move with the possibility of hitting US soldiers. Since the tweet of Donald Trump saying that they are pulling out and the subsequent resignation of Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, and now the clarification that it may take a little bit longer than previously thought, although some equipment has already begun to move out, and this talk of a buffer zone, clearly things are in great flux here. Now, it's unclear who's behind this particular attack. The broad question, of course, being what were those troops doing there? Were there adequate force protection measures if it turns out, in fact, that American troops were, in fact, targeted in this particular attack? But it certainly puts renewed focus on exactly what their mission will be going forwards and precisely what they do in an area where they have Turkish, as I say, backed Syrian rebels moving potentially towards those Syrian Kurds, but also the Russian-backed Syrian regime in that area too. A very complicated battleground indeed, and one, of course, which, when you hear a force is potentially leaving, that often leaves them open potentially to more vulnerabilities. I say we don't know what's happening here. We do know the Americans did everything they could to keep themselves safe. We also know they felt in central Manbij pretty safe. Even in central Raqqa, they were walking around buying kebabs when I was there back in February. But potentially a very significant moment here. Details are, at this point, unclear.
Yeah, and will it change the president's calculation on all of this, right? Nick, thank you. Barbara as well. We'll bring you more, of course, as we have it. Now to the shutdown. It is day 26. The federal workers are feeling the brunt, 1/4 of the government affected. And while there's still no movement to speak of here in Washington for a deal, the impact of almost 1 million missed paychecks is taking its toll across this country. The U.S. Coast Guard this morning has now become the first armed services to go unpaid in the government shutdown. That is because it falls under the Department of Homeland Security, not the Department of Defense. The nation's food banks are seeing a surge in demand from furloughed federal workers, those forced to work unpaid. The latter group, including TSA workers, many of whom have protested by calling in sick, causing huge lines at airport checkpoints. and food inspections have taken a big hit as well. But now the FDA is calling back hundreds more inspectors, but they too will not get paid.
He's earning his paycheck, but he's just not getting it.
This shutdown isn't just a Washington, D.C. problem. It's affecting real people here in Iowa.
Getting our pay stubs on Thursday and seeing $0 is just very disheartening. It makes it hard to wake up and want to go to work.
Yeah, imagine going to work, spending all the time, not getting paid for it. With tax filing season now just days away, Treasury Department is calling back 36,000 IRS workers unpaid, we should note, and the FAA says it is now appropriate to call back 3,000 airplane inspectors and engineers, also unpaid. A federal judge here in Washington has denied, at least for now, 3 separate bids to force the administration to pay the workers it deems essential. As we mentioned, those workers include the U.S. Coast Guard. The White House itself has now doubled its estimated impact of the shutdown on the nation's economic growth. And in a phone call yesterday with supporters, President Trump admitted that everything we just mentioned will only get worse. Said the president in that call will be out for a long time. And I have to say, Poppy, I was up on the Hill yesterday. I spoke to Democrats and Republicans, and they both threw their hands up in the air in terms of finding a way out of this, at least in the near term.
Unbelievable. Yeah. All right. The union representing air traffic controllers is among the parties suing for a lack of pay. A judge did deny all those requests to intervene for now, but did schedule further hearings. We'll see where that goes.
We're joined now by Trish Gilbert. She's the Executive Vice President of National Air Traffic Controllers Association. Trish, if I could begin on the safety issue, because that is the one that my friends and family, and I'm sure many of our viewers, are most concerned now. In the air, is there any reason why people flying should be concerned that there's not enough man and woman power to keep planes safe as they're flying?
Right. Well, you know, each day that this shutdown continues, the situation gets worse and worse. There are several complicated, complex layers in our system to ensure that it maintains the critical safety components that we all rely on when we fly. What we don't want to see is a catastrophic event occur, and for us to come to you and say, we told you that controllers are working longer hours. Now they don't have their support staff. They're going to work unpaid, so they're not sleeping at night. They're looking for other jobs. Maybe they're driving Uber before or after their shift. This is unacceptable. And we cannot come to this country and expect these people to continue to work without pay. How long can they do that?
Quite alarming to raise the possibility of a catastrophic event. Are you saying that the effect of this shutdown, just in terms of folks not sleeping, not having, I mean, some people have been called back, but not all those workers have been called back. Are you saying that that is a reasonable, credible concern?
I'm saying the system is disrupted, and the people need to be focused on the job that they're paid to do. Unfortunately, they're not getting paid to do it right now. They need 100% focus. They need not to be fatigued. They need not to be worried about whether they're going to have to sell their house, whether they're going to have to leave this profession altogether.
Given all that you've just laid out, and it is alarming to hear, bottom line, would you say, Trish, that flying is less safe today than it was a month ago?
I would say it is less safe today than it was a month ago. Absolutely. We do not have the professionals on the job. We are working with bare bones crews. We have controllers there doing what they do very, very well, but how long can you expect them to do it without all of the systems behind them to keep the system safe and the planes in the air? It's not just the air carriers that we're working through the system. It's life flights with organs. It's packages with cargo flights. It's the military. All of this is very important to this country. It's an economic engine, the air traffic control system in this country. And right now you're putting this incredible strain on the system, which is unacceptable and unreasonable. This is a horrible game of chicken that we're in the middle of. And we need to get out of it, and we need to get out of it today.
Goodness. An air traffic controller tweeted his concerns specifically, this was last week, about maintenance of the communication systems. He was saying that because people aren't checking out these systems, he's having trouble communicating with pilots at times, which is a remarkable thing for an air traffic controller to say. Beyond security screening on the ground, where there's been a lot of focus, TSA, are you concerned about issues like that?
Absolutely. We have a very robust voluntary reporting system, safety reporting system, where all of the workforce, when they're all there, they're not all there right now, are able to report safety concerns. We can still do that today, but there's nobody underneath to take any action with the things that are reported. And we have, you know, dozens of things reported every single day. So that process is completely torn away from the workforce. Maintenance of our infrastructure, new technologies that would improve safety, a piece of technology that is going to help controllers identify aircraft that are lined up on the wrong taxiway or runway, which was a critical event that we almost saw, tragic event in San Francisco last year when we had the Airbus lined up on the taxiway. So all of those things are very concerning to us.
Look, I think that you said it all. When you said flying is less safe now than it was a month ago, that is something every American and every member of Congress and in the White House should be thinking a lot about. Thank you. Good luck. And thanks to all the people you represent.
Thank you very much.
Doing their job unpaid. Wow. All right. So Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell once touted his deal-making skills in statements like this.
I'm the guy that gets us out of shutdowns. Remember me, I'm the guy that gets us out of shutdowns.
Well, so where is that deal-making now? Phil Mattingly joining us on Capitol Hill. Phil, what is the way out? This is a question I'm sure you're getting from friends and family as well. But like I was saying, I spoke to Democrats and Republicans, and they were throwing their hands up in the air as to a way out. Do you see any building of a critical mass among Republicans in particular to go against their president, in effect, here?
Yeah, the short answer is no. And if people want to know where Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is, he's waiting, and he's reflecting the will of his conference right now. In closed-door meetings, Republicans have continually told me that they have made clear they don't want to break with the president. And as long as Senate Republicans don't want to break with the president, at least en masse, a couple have mentioned some concerns about it, but the majority don't want to. The majority leader is not going to put anything on the floor that the president disagrees with. Here's the problem with that. McConnell is basically waiting, and has said this publicly, for Democrats and the president to agree on something or at least start the process of negotiating. I'm told that Democrats and the president have not communicated, at least at the leadership level, in more than a week. Now, the White House has kind of launched a strategy over the course of the last 48 hours to try and peel off rank-and-file Democrats, more moderate Democrats, Democrats from maybe districts that President Trump won in 2016. Yesterday, they tried that. Every single Democrat they invited to the White House for lunch with the president turned it down. They're going to give it another shot today. A bipartisan group known as the Problem Solvers Caucus, kind of a group of centrist Republicans and Democrats, are expected to head over to the White House at 11:30. But it's important to note, when talking is good, conversations are good. Jim, as you know from being up on the Hill, it's better than anything else that's going on right now. But those members are not empowered to make a deal. And the reality remains, as long as the leadership remains dug in, there's no way out of this anytime soon, guys.
Yeah.
Geez. All right. As you said, sort of take two today. We've got the Problem Solvers Caucus. One of their members will join us tomorrow. Let's see if they can make some headway. Phil, thanks very much.
And to be clear, Democratic leadership is digging in their heels on this.
1,000%. It's both.
It is, as Trish was just saying there, it's a game of chicken.
Yeah.
Other news we're following. The special counsel, Robert Mueller, says that Paul Manafort lied about contacts with the administration and that he, the special counsel, has the evidence to prove it. We have the latest on those developments.
Also, Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, the latest contender entering the 2020 presidential race. She will speak with reporters momentarily. We're on that. And a major U.S. ally in turmoil today. British Prime Minister Theresa May faces another no-confidence vote after her Brexit plan ends in a crushing defeat. We're live in London.
Of its confirmation hearing for Attorney General nominee William Barr. Barr, however, will not be there today. Instead, several law experts, analysts, and former justice officials will testify.
So yesterday, you saw Barr break with the president on a number of key points involving the Mueller probe, the Russia investigation, one being that he does not think the special counsel is involved in a witch hunt. Those words very important. You hear them a lot from the president. He said, nope, that's not the case yesterday. He also promised that he would, quote, provide as much transparency as he can about the probe, but he didn't, as you noticed, Jim. He didn't say, yes, you, the public, will have the whole report.
Right.
So that matters. Also today, a new court filing from the special counsel details how former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort allegedly lied about his contacts with the Trump administration after he was indicted. This 31-page document was redacted, a lot, mostly redacted, but it does reveal that Manafort spoke to a federal grand jury about his conversations with Russian associate Konstantin Kilimnik.
The two men began communicating in August 2016, just weeks before Manafort stepped down as Trump's campaign chair, but right in the midst of the election. But the special counsel is keeping the purpose of that communication under wraps. Let's bring in former House Intelligence Chairman Mike Rogers and former federal prosecutor and current defense attorney Shan Wu. Mike, give us the significance of this, because again, we're getting kind of smoke signals from the special counsel's investigation here. But those smoke signals keep pointing to conversations between the president's campaign chairman and a Russian known to be working for Russian military intelligence. and communications that Manafort repeatedly lied about. Significance of that.
Well, it's very significant. A couple of reasons. One, this happened well into 2018, so this is well down the track of both the president being elected and seated and going through the process of his administration, number one. But number two, this to me shows, as an old FBI guy, that the same kind of attitude that got him in trouble in the first place got him in trouble the second round. He thought he was going to outsmart the prosecutor. He thought he was going to outsmart the folks because he had this guy from overseas who's probably had some training, at least some limited training in intelligence, if he had a relationship, as they state, with the intelligence services of Russia. He was running his office in Ukraine. I mean, all of that smells bad to me, and it means that there's probably a whole, under that redaction is some really interesting reading that we're not going to get to see, at least right away.
To that point, though, you see it a little bit differently, Shan, just in that you believe that some of Manafort's defenses here are plausible.
Yeah, I think in Manafort's defense and his legal team's defense, it's a lot of detail, it's a lot of debriefings, and it's possible to make some mistakes. However, I would agree with Mike, the overall picture looks bad. I mean, when I bring in someone to cooperate, we are meticulous in going through the material, and most importantly, you have to have a degree of rapport and trust with the prosecution. If there's any questions, you can tell what areas your client's going to be unclear on. That's got to be flagged. So this whole picture looks very bad.
Can I just ask you as a follow-up, because you were, I should note this just for transparency, you did represent Rick Gates previously. And we did learn also yesterday, Rick Gates is still cooperating, and Manafort said, I think, Mueller's team said at least 2 more months of that. Significance?
I think that is very significant. I'm not commenting on anything confidential or privileged, but the fact that Gates has been silent and now this information has surfaced, he's still cooperating on a number of investigations, that means a lot. It may also signal that we're not as close to the end as we are speculating with regard to that.
Yes, there's been a lot of that, like bring the troops home for Christmas, right? It always gets pushed out. Mike Rogers, for folks at home who are not following the intricacies of every development, give us kind of a big picture update as to what we know, what's been revealed from this black box of the Mueller investigation on that essential question. Is there evidence that you've seen as a former Republican member of Congress that at least it's still an open question as to whether there was cooperation between the Trump campaign and Russia?
Well, it's not clear to me, even after seeing all of this evidence, that it wasn't an individual who had contracts in Russia. You have to remember, this is what made him a millionaire, or, excuse me, in the Ukraine, in Manafort. This is what got him rich over the years. He was really out of the political consulting business domestically for 10 years or something. And so this is the kind of thing, and he just sold his soul to the devil, clearly, when you read the material that you see before you, that he decided he didn't care that he was going to work for a pro-Kremlin candidate in Ukraine and everything that entailed. And by the way, you can't, it's really difficult to walk down the street and not bump into somebody that works for Russian intelligence in Kiev, right? And so he would know that. And the way that they structured the money. So this is a guy that clearly had his vested interest in his future in these gray area, if not corrupt area, of dealing politically over there. So what I saw here is when he went to Spain, which was the big revelation of late, to meet with Klimnik and gave him
after the election
and gave him polling information. Actually, there was a report during the election. He went and gave him polling information. Was he doing that for his own self-interest, or was he doing that at the behest of the campaign? That's what I haven't seen yet, and I wouldn't make the jump that the campaign said, go do this quite yet. I just haven't seen that much.
And we wouldn't know that had the redactions on that been a little bit better or as foolproof as the redactions on this one.
I have a feeling Mr. Wu's client is probably going to be found in some of those redactions. I'll bet my next
no comment on that.
Because we know that Manafort's lawyers have accidentally revealed through these non-redacted, what should have been redactions, that he did share the polling data with Klimnik. But now we know, Shan, that the two men were communicating while Manafort was still working for the campaign. So does connecting those dots take you any further in your belief?
It does. I mean, I think factually, yes, you don't have that last bit of nexus. Did somebody in the campaign, did the president okay those contacts? But I think the problem at this point is the campaign was in touch with the Russian intelligence people because Manafort was the campaign chair. I mean, that's sort of like a closed book at this point. So that has been established. The only question is how deep, how much knowledge, who had the knowledge now. So I think that bridge has really been crossed at this point.
And also, to be clear, that wasn't the only line of communication between Trump world, Trump campaign, and Russians. I mean, both before and after the election, because you had the Trump Tower meeting, you had Michael Flynn lying about contacts with the Russian ambassador during the transition.
And the interesting part of this is, from the intelligence side, that the Russians wanted to make contact with the campaign. And so you have that piece of hanging out there that I think we haven't seen yet. And that part of that investigation is not public yet. I imagine that that's going to be really interesting to see how successful they were. Remember, just because the Russians wanted to do it doesn't mean the campaign wanted to do it. But we know that they made that effort, and now you know that Manafort certainly had these connections not only before the campaign, during the campaign, and now after the campaign. The story is certainly getting muddied.
It's really the roots of it are in counterintelligence. That's what we're finding out now.
Gentlemen, thank you. Nice to have you both. Yeah. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand announcing her plans to enter the 2020 presidential race. The race getting more crowded. Who will stand out?
And we're just moments away from the opening bell on Wall Street. Stocks expected to rise slightly at the start of trading. See that green arrow there? The market's calm. This despite grave uncertainty over Brexit. Some investors believe a delay in that decision could be coming. Just into CNN, ISIS is now claiming responsibility for the attack targeting a patrol by U.S.-led coalition forces in Syria. We should note that you should take those claims of responsibility always with something of a grain of salt.
Yep.
But that is a new claim from ISIS.
It is. We do have some new video also in. I want you to take a look at this. So this obviously purports to show the moment, here you go, the attack. There you have it in Manbij.
Looks
in
like
Syria.
What would be a suicide bomber, in that you don't see it emanating from a vehicle there, but there's a crowd of people there. What you can't see in that video are U.S. forces, but we do know that a U.S. patrol took place in the city of Manbij today.
And that's a big answer we need right now as we go to the Pentagon. Barbara Starr is there and joins us again. Is a question about whether we know at this point whether or not U.S. forces were injured or killed in the attack.
Well, good morning. We want to make sure everybody knows everything we know, and what we do know is at this hour, the U.S. military is working on a statement that they expect to make public shortly about what they know about what happened in Manbij earlier today and the impact.
Into CNN, there's a lot of news this morning. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has sent a letter to President Trump asking to move the day of the State of the Union address, citing security concerns resulting from the ongoing shutdown.
We were sort of shocked when we heard this, but this can happen. Let's go straight to the Hill. Phil Mattingly joins us. So technically, she has to invite the president to deliver the State of the Union, which she did 2 weeks ago. This is a letter asking him to move the date. Can she actually disinvite him?
We're about to see, apparently. Look, guys, I think we've all been waiting to see kind of what the next step is from either the president or leadership in trying to shake free the current impasse and shut down negotiations. And I think this is it. Nancy Pelosi writing this letter to the speaker, basically saying the two key agencies charged or tasked with security for the State of the Union, which is a major security event that requires kind of all government resources, given the number of VIPs that are in the room, are the Department of Homeland Security and the Secret Service. Those two agencies are currently not being funded. They're either furloughed or people are not being paid to come to work. Because of that, Pelosi writes, sadly, given the security concerns, unless government reopens this week, I suggest we work together to determine another suitable date after government has reopened for this address, or for you to consider delivering your State of the Union address in writing to Congress on January 29th. I'm assuming the latter is not exactly what the president and his team would like to do. This has been viewed as an opportunity, particularly if the government's still shut down, to really kind of have the mantle to really kind of attack Democrats, make his case again for the border wall. The big question now is going to be, how is the president going to respond? I'm told Pelosi just read this letter off to Democrats in a closed-door meeting. They're very supportive of it. Now, next move, White House, guys.
I like the understatement there, Phil, that the president might not welcome this opportunity being taken away from him.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Phil, thanks very much. Also, it's official. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand entering the 2020 presidential race. Listen to this.
I'm filing an exploratory committee for President of the United States tonight. I'm going to run for President of the United States because as a young mom, I'm going to fight for other people's kids as hard as I would fight for my own, which is why I believe that health care should be a right and not a privilege.
Hot off of Gillibrand's announcement there came news that her colleague, Senator Sherrod Brown, is launching a listening tour to make his own decision to run. The pair now joining These are already existing 5 contenders. The field only set to get much more crowded from here.
Joining us now, a chief political correspondent for Esquire, Ryan Lizza, and politics reporter for The Guardian, Sabrina Siddiqui. Good morning to you both. Good morning. So there are those names we just mentioned. Then there's someone who hasn't thrown his hat in the ring, but there's a draft Beto campaign. Julian Castro, you were just in Texas doing some of this reporting. It's really early, but you know, Gillibrand made this announcement on Colbert, big national stage. What's your read?
My read is that the field is going to be enormous. The Democrats haven't had a field of this size since 92. It'll be bigger than 92, but 92 and 88 were the last 2 Democratic primaries where you had a big field and no really obvious front runner. If Joe Biden gets in, he'll enter the race as someone, I think, who will be called the front runner, but not in a way that, say, Al Gore started in 2000 or Hillary Clinton in 2008, where you had a single dominant candidate and everyone that was sort of like a planet that all the other ones circled around. This is going to be a wide open field, very difficult to predict anything until it sorts itself out later in the year.
Yeah, not unlike the huge fields you had for Republicans in 2016, right? When you look at the folks there, you see quite a spread in terms of the ideological spectrum. I mean, the sort of Warren wing of the party, very liberal, reform-minded. Sherrod Brown, a red state, in effect, sitting senator there. I mean, it's going to be a battle, is it not, for the direction of the party, but also for who Democrats think would pose the greatest challenge to President Trump.
Absolutely, and you have what is shaping up to be a very vast and diverse field of likely candidates. But what's interesting for Democrats is there are some issues that have effectively become a litmus test for the party. So you've seen many of those contenders or likely contenders already embrace Medicare for all. Most of them support raising the minimum wage. You have a lot of them who, of course, recognize the need to address Me Too and sexual harassment in the workplace. They've taken a much more expansive view of tightening laws around guns in this country. And so I think that you have seen the Democratic base obviously move in a far more progressive direction. So you might have someone like Beto O'Rourke or Joe Biden making those appeals to, you know, the centrist wing of the party, but the extent to which what we used to refer to as centrist still exists, that's an open-ended question. There'll also be a challenge for Democrats not to let President Trump very much dictate the narrative and soak up all of the oxygen in the race.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Huge field, but not maybe as much ideological diversity as in some of the Democratic Party, say in the 90s and early 2000s. There's a lot of consensus on the big issues.
Let me ask you about this, Ryan, because not on 2020, but on the current disaster of the shutdown that is. Interesting what it is meaning for the president and the economy. I mean, on the economy is where the president has consistently polled high and much higher than his overall approval rating. That is now taking a hit. I had Kevin Hassett, the head of the White House Council on Economic Advisors, tell me yesterday, every week we're shut down, it's shaving another 10th off GDP. And the polling numbers are showing that for the president. You've got the new Quinnipiac poll, the president's handling of the economy down below 50%, down 4% since November. If you're sitting in the White House in the West Wing, what is this making you think?
Well, the one thing that Trump has low approval ratings for considering how good the economy has been for his first 2 years. His approval rating should be a lot higher, right? Presidents that preside over economy, the kind of economy that he's presided over, not to say that there haven't been weak spots, but GDP has been good. The unemployment numbers have been very good. Generally, if you're presiding over that kind of economy, your approval rating should be above 50%, right? Trump, given that, has had abysmal approval ratings. So the economy has been holding him artificially aloft.
And now that's...
And if once that is threatened, everything about Trump is threatened. His reelection is obviously threatened. That's the number one thing that would help him get reelected is a good economy. And so he, at some point, has to look at that data and say, wait a second, this shutdown is just a gun to the, a self-inflicted wound, and it's not just it's every time slice off GDP is.
It may also help explain why such a focus on the wall as an issue. You're kind of clinging to that as a way to kind of keep the base solid. So
it is ultimately about delivering something he campaigned on to his base, but a majority of the American public, according to most polls, increasingly blame the president for the shutdown, and that's why the key people to watch are those Senate Republicans who aren't necessarily aligned with the president on dragging the shutdown in the pursuit of
Well, they can complain all they want in private until they come out in public and actually vote against the president.
There you go. Yeah, right.
Ryan Lizza, Sabrina Siddiqui, thanks very much, and we'll be right back. Lots of news we're covering this hour. Less than 2 hours from now, President Trump is set to meet with a bipartisan group of lawmakers who call themselves the Problem Solvers Caucus. This in the Situation Room in the White House, and the topic, of course, the shutdown.
Let's hope they can solve some problems. The question this morning, will the Democrats physically come to the table? They didn't yesterday. Democrats declined the invitation to sit down with the president at this working lunch. Joining us now is Republican Congresswoman Susan Brooks of Indiana, who did show up at that meeting. She's also, I should note, one of the first members of Congress to say, I won't get paid during the shutdown. I will decline my incoming paychecks. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so walk us through yesterday.
Well, I was invited to a bipartisan lunch, which, by the way, is not the first time I've been invited to a bipartisan lunch at the White House. I was invited to a bipartisan luncheon at the White House when tax reform was being discussed. And so I had high hopes, quite frankly, that maybe some members would come to the table and have the president and some members of his negotiating team really try to begin some discussions with members of the Democrat caucus. They chose not to come yesterday. A number of Republicans, we did go because it's very important that we continued this dialogue and we have more discussions about how to break through this impasse.
Talking is nice, but talking is not going to get anywhere. I mean, I talked to Democrats and Republicans on the Hill yesterday.
Right.
I asked them, how are you going to get out of this? All of them threw their hands up in the air. The fact is, one side is either going to have to blink or you're going to have to talk compromise.
Or both blink.
The compromise that has been discussed for 1,000 years on the Hill, okay? Money, as you know well, money for the border wall, long-term protection for the dreamers. Is that at all on the table? Do you support that? Does the president support that?
I actually believe those types of negotiations could be on the table if we could bring the Democrats back to the table. And that's what I've been trying to do with members.
But you know the president
bring
could
them
say,
back to the
he
table.
could say, okay, I'm open on DACA, come, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the
And I have brought that
McConnell
up.
won't bring it unless the president expressed support for a solution.
Actually, before the shutdown began, I brought up DACA as a negotiating tool and to begin those discussions. But border security, everything that happens at the border, this is all a part of it as well. And the president needs to have a true counterproposal come to the White House. And that's where I disagree. I think talking is very important. And when we sit down and actually talk, and there is actually an offer that's been given on border security, counter, and that's what we're waiting for from the Democrats,
as you know,
a counter.
There was, and it was passed by both houses of Congress about a month ago. And you know, months before that, there were $25 billion for the border with protection for dreamers. Did the president say yesterday he would support such an exchange, protect dreamers for money for the wall?
We didn't actually get into those kinds of discussions.
It's really, why? Isn't that like
part of it is part of what we need to do is to figure out how to even begin the discussions again. And that's what is not happening. And that is why we are imploring members to convince Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer to go back, not to come in and say, I'll give you $1, because right now we have 650 miles of current barriers, walls, fencing. This is an additional 234 miles more. And what has happened, and what I'm so discouraged by in some ways, is that the facts of the massive numbers in the last quarter, the last couple of months of 2018 and continuing, are the massive numbers of children coming to the border, the massive numbers of families coming to the border, and we don't have the resources to care for them.
And that's a fair point, because more people are coming in family groups. But I do want to look at the numbers here, because these are important. These are interdictions at the border since 2010, when Republicans took over control of Congress. You came in 2012. Why is it a crisis today, and it wasn't a crisis in 2010 when the numbers were higher?
I will tell you what's
in 2013, 14,
Here's
16.
what's different. In 14, actually, when President Obama was in office, we had a breakdown again. We were in the middle of immigration reform discussions then. And then that was when the massive influx of unaccompanied children began. And we could not take care of them. We couldn't figure out the resource issues. And those numbers have increased. The number of children coming without adults, which, by the way, this is often led by the drug cartels on the southern part of Mexico. And so it's different. Those were singles people that used to come, And now it's totally different what's happening at the border, and we don't have the resources to house, to handle this massive influx of
totally
children
different.
and families.
I mean, the numbers Jim points out are really important and factual. Look,
and
the debate.
Republicans had control of three branches of government until a couple of months ago.
And very, very frustrating. Some of us did vote for, by the way, to resolve some of this. If you look at the Goodlatte, what we called the Goodlatte immigration reform bills, and McCall's, we did try, but we didn't have any real meaningful input from the other side of the aisle. It's very, very frustrating. And in the meantime, our federal employees are suffering.
Yes.
I'm a former United States attorney. I've led an office of federal employees. We know that they are suffering, and it is wrong. And while I find it ironic, I just learned that Speaker Pelosi is asking to delay State of the Union because of security. That is what this essential argument is about. It is about border security. Border security is critically important. It is what the president and I believe the American people agree.
I apologize for interrupting. We have some unfortunate breaking news to bring to everyone. Thank you for joining us very much.
Thank you so much.
That's right. This just in to CNN. The U.S.-led coalition has confirmed the following via Twitter. U.S. service members were killed during an explosion while conducting a